A sunny day turns cold. I was on a sleepover with my best friend one Saturday. It was a nice sunny day and we decided to go for a walk. Her mom had always been very skeptical, even though she lived in a nice neighborhood, so she made us take her big, friendly, curly road retriever. We lived in Australia, and my friend lived right near a large national park. There are lots of walking trails in the area, and we decided to take a route that wasn't as familiar. We had been out walking for about 10 minutes when suddenly a tall man with a large gut appeared from nowhere. He walked out from among the trees and bushes, and not from another trail. By then, he was walking up the dirt path towards us. He was smiling a crooked smile, and in his hand, he held something small and black like a stick. At the time, I didn't really take much notice as to how this might be strange. As he neared us, he moved his hand behind his back, and with that, I began to question this man's motives. "Hello, girls," the man said as he neared us. "How are you doing?" "Good, thanks," we replied, being polite. He stopped in front of us, smiling. My friend Jane didn't seem to feel as uncomfortable as I did. "Is he friendly?" the man said as he gestured to Henry, the dog. "Yep," Jane said enthusiastically. I noticed the man discreetly move what I now saw as a baton into his other hand. He then slowly reached out his hand towards Henry. Suddenly, the hairs on the back of the dog's neck stood up and he let out a deep growl. The man's smile suddenly faded, and he skimmed past us, chewing at the side of his mouth. "Have a good day, girls," he called as he quickly continued up the path. As he walked away, we bolted in the opposite direction, hearts racing. Throughout my whole friendship with Jane, neither of us ever experienced Henry acting aggressively towards anyone else. The feeling I felt in the presence of that man is hard to describe, but it was definitely not normal. He was making human traps. I grew up on the countryside, right next to a national park frequently visited by nature lovers and bird enthusiasts. It was the kind of park where you're not really allowed to bike or ride horses, only walk or run. But 10-year-old me felt it was a stupid rule and did so anyways, because the trails were perfect for it. I knew fully well that I wasn't supposed to do that, and was caught a few times, but nothing came of it apart from a half-hearted "don't do it again," and I did, of course, until one day, something frightening happened that made me stop. My family were horse breeders, and I would often take on one of the horses for a ride, usually in the Forbidden Park. This day, very early morning, the first day of the summer holiday, it was beautiful outdoors, misty and foggy, yet a sky that promised a sunny day ahead. Since it was still so early, before 6 o'clock, I knew there wouldn't be anyone on the trail to see me, so I let the horse set off full speed along the trail. I only slowed down on the part of the trail that got a steep one on the side, leading down to the river, because the thought of one step so close to the edge was too much even for a kid with a next to non-existing risk assessment skills. Suddenly, the horse came to a halt and refused to take another step. I grew up with horses all of my life and knew that usually indicates that you need to investigate. Is there something with the hoofs? Did the horse spot something that spooked it? The hoofs were fine, but the horse didn't move an inch. That's when I saw it. Someone had set up a trap. A thin, sharp metal wire across the trail, in perfect neck height for an adult. I stopped and looked around, but didn't see anyone. The wire was well attached to 2 trees and impossible for me to remove, so I led the horse around it, and to do so I had to walk up a bit into the wooden area on the side of the trail. That's when I heard the singing. There is a song called Hedge Tom de Goober, and it was that exact melody, but the words were different and sung in a muffled, sniggering voice. Today, I only remember parts of it, but translated it would have been something like, "Hey, all you runners, come here passing, let the lifeblood pour out." I, as silently as I could and with my heart in my throat, backed away, got up back onto the horse, and hurried back the way I came as fast as I could. I knew at that moment I had to tell someone about it, but at the same time wanted to avoid admitting to riding a huge and very forbidden horse on those protective trails. So now I had a problem. The old stories about a mad old man living in the shed in the woods, a shed that was once a cottage for the local hunter, came back to me as I hung on the horse for dear life. I got home and told my older brother what had happened. He went back there with me in tow. We found the wire trap, and after a while of searching, we also found a spear-like pole in the ground, right on the spot where you'd land if you came running and jumped over the fallen tree on the trail. That's when we called the police. The area was searched, and several similar traps were found, but no sight of the old man. The following summer, though, there were big news in the local paper about spear-like poles being found right under the water surface, directly under that little tower you're supposed to dive from at the lake, and black garage bags filled with big rocks were found on the narrow bridge crossing the river, so that if a car had hit it, risk is it would have gone off the road and into the water. Being watched while camping in the deep woods. I live in the foothills of mountains in northeast Georgia. It's a beautiful area with hundreds of miles of national forest, some great state parks, and a ton of fantastic camping places. Unfortunately, my hometown is also relatively poor. While there are some out-of-town residents from Atlanta or other places, a lot of people where I live are really poor. I do freelance work as a technical writer, so I can do most of my work online. If I didn't have that going for me, I'd have to move somewhere else. It's just one of those small towns that will rob of your ability to accomplish anything in life if you stay there for too long, without anything else going for you at least. Excluding a handful of doctors and lawyers and Georgia Power Company employees, the only employment in the area is at Walmart, fast food, and a couple of grocery stores. To the east of my town, there's a massive national forest. It's loaded with great camping sites and lots of relatively unused hiking trails. I really enjoy hiking on them with my dog, but it can be a bit of an unnerving experience sometimes. It's about a 10-mile drive from town, and there's no cell phone service or homes for miles. In the past, there have been a lot of vehicle break-ins at the trailheads. The gravel parking lots at some of their glitter with bits of broken glass, from what I'm guessing were car windows. Sometimes, there are really shifty people hanging around those trailheads, or just driving around on the Forest Service roads. These are really rough roads, but you'll see these beat-up $500 cars just barreling along roads meant for a 4x4. Some of the people you see in the cars look like the guy that got crushed by an ATM in Breaking Bad. All that being said, it's still a great place to camp. However, you just have to be careful. A few years ago, 2 of my friends and I decided to go play paintball in the national forest. Probably not legal, I know. We decided to turn the paintball expedition into a camping trip, so we could play the next morning too. After a pretty uneventful day of shooting paintballs at each other, we drive a couple miles to one of the more popular camping spots. There, unfortunately, a church group or something that had taken up all the spots in the area. This was really the only camping spot that we were familiar with, and it was, at the time, getting pretty late. We decide to keep on looking, so we drive for about an hour further and further into the woods. By this time, it's getting a little bit dark, and we're getting a little bit worried about finding a spot. We all had GPS on our smartphones, but none of us had any service. We turn off onto an unfamiliar road that isn't in a very good shape. In fact, it looks like the Forest Service rangers used a backhoe to block off the road with a mound of dirt. A broken metal barrier lay in the woods nearby. That said, it looked like the 4x4 vehicles had been going over the mound, so it was pretty worn down. Our F-150 had pretty high clearance, so we decided to go over the mound. There was an old gravel road on the other side, and the road was pretty much clear of debris. We drove a few miles down this road and came across an opening next to a small creek. There were some blue tarps hanging over a plywood table nailed to a tree, which seemed kind of odd. That said, it was pretty much dark at this point, and we didn't want to keep driving around all night looking for a camping spot. We left the truck light running, and we set up the tent. As we were setting up the tent, I started to notice that there was a lot of trash in the woods surrounding the site. I see a green bottle laying on the ground. I take a look at the label and see that it's a bottle of home and garden insecticide. I was really tired of the time, and I just thought that someone had been dumping their home garbage out there. None of us thought it was weird that someone would be dumping garbage in an area that is more than an hour from the nearest home. We set up camp, had some beers, and made chili from scratch. By this time, it was probably around 11 p.m. So, as we were eating, we noticed a faint glow from the other side of a nearby hill. At first, we thought it was moonlight filtering its way through the trees. However, the angle just didn't make sense. It didn't seem to be like a bright light, and it wasn't moving. It was kind of like that glow you see over a bright city. We couldn't see the light source itself, though. Since there was no other access roads in the area, we decided it wasn't other campers. The hill was about a quarter mile from our campsite, so we decided to go and investigate. Under normal circumstances, I know I wouldn't have done so. However, we had all had a few rum and cokes in our stomachs, and two of us, Jacob and I, decided to go take a look. My other friend Isaac decides to stay behind to pop some popcorn over the fire. We start walking towards the light source, and the situation gets even stranger. All the trees in the area have their bark knocked off in a circle around their trunks. We thought it could have been the work of a beaver that lived in the creek, but it seems strange that a beaver would go around all these trees and just knock the bark off in a circle. Jacob and I start talking about the Ghost Beaver in pretty loud voices, probably due to our drunkenness. As we're almost to the top of the hill, Jacob tripped and yelled, "Ah, shit!" A few seconds after he yelled, the light, whatever it was, went out. We look at each other and decide that maybe we don't need to see what that light was after all. We walk back in silence and keep looking back every few seconds. We decide to turn off our flashlight and just use the moonlight to get back to the campsite. When we get a couple of 100 feet from the campsite, I can see my other friend Isaac walking around the campsite. He was wearing a hooded coat that I hadn't seen him wearing before, and for some odd reason, he's carrying his paintball gun around in his hand. That seemed a little odd, we said to each other. The fire had started to die down, and we couldn't see our campsites very well at this point. We'd probably been gone for almost an hour. From the distance, it looked like Isaac was looking for something. He kept walking around the site and was peering inside the tent. When we were almost back to the campsite, we saw Isaac walk up the road we came in on. We figured that he was going to use the bathroom and didn't want to wander through the woods like us. When we got back, We sat next to the fire and waited for Isaac to come back. All of a sudden, we see him lurch out of the tent. He stumbles a few feet and vomits. After we left, he had a few more rum and cokes, he mumbles. We ask him why he kept wandering around the campsite with a paintball gun, and he gets a strange look on his face. They're locked up in the cab of the truck. Did you unlock it? We go and check the truck, enter the door code, and see all our paintball equipment just as we had left it before. The keys to the truck were still hidden in a magnetic fob underneath. I got a sinking feeling in the pit of my stomach. Isaac, what were you doing after we left? I asked. I was watching a movie on my phone and I fell asleep, I guess. But you were walking around with your paintball gun, right? Did you just change jackets? Isaac said he had been in the tent since we left, and that he had been wearing the same unhooded fleece all night. Someone had been walking around our campsite, and it wasn't Isaac. At this point, all of us are way too drunk to drive, but we decide to go ahead and pack up and go back to my house for the night. We didn't bother packing up the tent. We just folded down with the sleeping bags and everything inside it. We jump the F-150 and I start to drive out. When we get to the dirt hump, we see something gray blocking our path. The metal barrier that had been lying in the woods earlier is now back on its stand, right on top of the hump earlier. By this point, all of us have sobered up to the situation. No one wants to get out of the car to try and move the barrier. I had a metal guard on the front of the F-150, so I drive forward slowly, tapping the metal barrier with the front of my truck. It falls right off. It must have just been balanced on top, and we drive over it slowly. We were terrified that it would pop one of the truck's tires as we drove over it, but it didn't. As we drive down the road, we see a vehicle following us with its lights off. It's probably 1,000 feet behind us, but we keep catching glimpses of it as the moon reflects lights off it. I start to drive as fast as I can on the Forest Service road, and the other vehicle keeps pace. It doesn't get any closer though, it just stays just 1 or 2 turns behind us. We can only see it when the road straightens out. After about 45 minutes of speeding along gravel roads, we make it back to the main paved road. I start to drive everyone back to my house, but I decide to go a different way just to be safe. I didn't get pulled over for a DUI, luckily. Camping can be fun, but very rural camping can be dangerous. I've driven past that metal barrier since that time, but it's always been in place. Still, I would never go down that road again though.